Greetings. So thank you for watching this video. Today we're going to talk about something that is quite unusual and a little bit out of this world. There's time loops, the law of one, and the warlock. And this is only part one of a video. I'm going to be doing part two later this week, and hopefully you will stick around. You'll see part one, and then next week or in the next fortnight you'll see part two, and it's going to make more sense. I would just like to start with this fictional character called Adam Warlock. I don't know if you have seen this character. This is a character that I met in the 80s. So I found the books, the comic books in the 80s. It's a fictional character. To me, it's the most amazing Marvel characters that you could possibly find. To me, hands down, it's far more interesting than anybody else. All of these guys, Thor, Captain America, Spider-Man, or whatever you throw at this guy, nothing can beat this guy by the sheer amount of information that you get out of reading these guys' stories. It's just unbelievable how much you would learn just by reading what happens to Adam Warlock. The character itself was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in the late 60s. I only got hold of the stories as a kid in the early 80s. So by the time that I started reading about Adam Warlock, the stories were already a little bit old, but it just completely blew my mind. And I didn't know why I identified so much with the stories. I carried this for 35 or 40 years. I was never able to understand why I identified with this guy so much. The story, the timeline, the logic behind it, it's absolutely amazing. And I always had a bee in my bonnet, thinking, hang on, perhaps is this really fiction? Is that something that these guys are just plucking out of their heads? What is happening here? How can fiction be stay with you and stick into your brain so much? So let me just give you a very brief introduction to Adam Warlock. The first thing that you notice is that he's a little bit bonkers. He's a little bit crazy. Today, it's quite a commonplace to have superheroes that are messed up. You see X-Men, Wolverine. You don't know if he's a good guy or if he's a bad guy. Today, this is quite common, but back in the 60s, if you read the material from the 60s and 70s, this was really groundbreaking. So the fact that Adam Warlock was really messed up, and he wasn't really sure about his place in the universe, this was absolutely unprecedented back then. So this guy broke ground. This fictional character broke grounds for a lot that was coming afterwards. You remember that back in the 60s and 70s, Batman was absolutely perfect. Superman was absolutely perfect. There was no flaws. There were absolutely angels in a sense. And this character comes around. This Adam Warlock comes around and says, look, I'm bonkers. I have no idea what I'm doing in the universe. I'm very powerful. but I'm going to learn my place in the universe together with you as you read my stories. And I found that was really insightful. That was really interesting. Now, so he is essentially someone that is just wandering in the universe. He is a synthetic being, so he wasn't born of a woman. So he was born on this planet Earth, but he was a synthetic being. He was created in a laboratory, and he had lots and lots of powers. And he had this gem, which is a gem that is situated, or it's located in his third eye chakra, ajna. And I didn't know any of these back in the 80s when I started reading the stories in the first place. But the gem is located in the third eye chakra, and it actually opens portals. It opens interdimensional portals, and is capable of dragging people inside, and it's capable of illuminating certain questions for Warlock. So I thought that this was really insightful, even though I only learned about the third eye, ajna, and chakras 30 years or 40 years later. But this was really insightful, and it really blew my mind when I was reading this for the first time. Now, Adam Warlock was never really very successful. You don't talk about him in the same way that people talk about, I don't know, Iron Man or Spider-Man or these other guys. And I think that this is because he was a messed up person. He was really crazy in a sense, but the storyline as well was absolutely unbelievably bonkers. And I'm going to give you a bit of a sense of the storyline. Basically, Adam, he just wanders around the universe until one day he meets this guy. This guy is called the Magus, and this guy on the right is he thinks of himself as a god. He has set up a church, and he goes around planets with his star fleet. And if a planet decides to convert to his own religion, then the planet becomes part of the universal church of the Magus. If the planet refuses to accept the new religion, then the planet is destroyed and the inhabitants are absolutely wiped out or enslaved. And Adam Warlock, here on the left, he decides that he's going to fight this guy. And the crazy thing is that as the story develops, Adam realizes that the Magus is himself from the future. So the Magus is a future version of Adam Warlock. So basically what happened was the Magus has become, in the future, so powerful that he has broken outside of time and has gone back in time to create this religion. And as he goes back in time, he falls under the same timeline where he had departed from. And of course, he meets up with Adam. So he meets up with his former self. And now his former self is desperately trying to prevent two things. Firstly, prevent the Magus from gaining control of the entire galaxy. And the second thing is to prevent himself, Adam, from eventually falling into madness so deeply that he would eventually become the Magus. So it's a completely crazy storyline, and I think that this is what attracted me to this in the first place. Now, Adam Warlock he realizes that the only way to stop the Magus is to stop himself from transforming into the Magus, and he decides to suck up his own soul. So he commits suicide in a sense. He decides to suck up his own soul into the gem that he carries in his third eye chakra ajna. So as you can see, this, just by telling you the story, my mind is being blown away just by how interesting and how insightful the whole thing is. The other thing as well is eventually Adam Warlock is capable of resurrection. So he comes outside of the gem back into our universe, and he has a few other stories. Then he meets the Avengers, he meets Thanos, and then eventually there are other versions of Adam Warlock, but it was never really very successful, as we have all the Marvel fictional characters. And just one thing that I wanted to say is that Adam Warlock is the original leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy. So now we have this movie, The Guardians of the Galaxy, which is almost like a bit of a comedy with Drax and the little fox guy there in the left, and all of this stuff. But there is absolute no mention of Adam Warlock, which is the original leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And I think that this is really shameful, because I'm a huge fan, and I would like to see movies and more material with him. Now, if we could just have a look at the story. Basically, Adam evolves just like anyone else. So he starts as a hapless child. As I said, he is a synthetic being, so he never had a body of a child. Then he starts trying to change the world, and he realizes that he can't. He becomes very cynic, and that's the beginning of his descent into madness, which eventually leads to him turning into this all-powerful being called the Magus. So it's the corrupt tomorrow. Now, this is the story of a timeline. So he starts as Adam Warlock, and he ends up as the Magus. Now, the thing is, this is an example of a fictional character that is experiencing what now we call a time loop, because basically what happens is that the Magus, once his power becomes so great that he is capable to break out of time, he then jumps out of the timeline and returns to an earlier point of the timeline, where he, either willingly or unwillingly, he meets up with his former self, Adam Warlock. Now, this is really very interesting, and because of all of the possibilities, the parallel timelines and time loops and all of that stuff, but it is essentially fiction. This is just fiction. This is just a couple of guys in the late 60s that maybe had a little bit too much acid and came up with these stories. And this is really just fiction. Or so I thought, because 35 years later I come across this material, which is called the Ra material, the Law of One. The Law of One was basically a set of information bits that was channeled by a group of researchers, so Don Elkins, Carla Ruckert, and Jim McCarthy. So these researchers, they were able to channel an entity, and this entity was Ra, or this entity called itself Ra. And this channeling happened in the 80s. It started in 1981, and I think it went all the way to 1993, if I'm not mistaken. And this entity started giving the group information about the universe, about time, about spiritual progress, about the polarity. So all of those people, they are their service to others. So in other words, they are good. And all of those people, they choose to be service to self. So they are evil. And this entity started providing these researchers with all of this magnificent information. And the result is a series of 4 books, or four original books plus a commentary book. And I really advise you, I suggest that you get in touch with this material. You could start with some videos on YouTube or some websites. You can just look for the Law of One or the raw material. Today we know from other researchers, David Wilcock and Corey Good, that the original entity that gave the raw material is probably a being, an avian being, an avian interdimensional being, which is 6th density. So in other words, this entity is 3 evolutionary cycles ahead of us. And this entity, at least the entity that has contacted Corey Good, calls himself or herself raw tier air. And as I said, so this entity is 3 evolutionary cycles ahead of us. What does that mean? So, for example, we are 3rd density. We're trying to go to 4th density, but we are currently now 3rd density. And this entity is 6th density. And if you just want to have an idea about what that means, your pet, your irrational pet, the dog or the cat that you have in your house, it's a 2nd density entity. So we are just 1 evolutionary cycle ahead of a common dog or a common cat or a chook. Or a snake or something. And this guy there that you're looking at, it's 6th density, and it's 3 evolutionary cycles ahead of us. So they know their stuff, basically. The Law of One talks about a whole bunch of things, but what I wanted to highlight here in this video is that Ra discusses the existence of what they call oversoul, and in spiritual or spiritualistic language, that would be, we would know that as the higher self. And they also mention that the oversoul of a person is usually a 6th density entity. This 6th density entity has become so powerful, his consciousness has become so amazingly evolved that they are able to, by the power of thought, to break out of time, and that this entity is positively oriented. So it's a good entity, it's a angelical entity, it's a harmonious entity, or in the words of Erwin Laszlo, it's a coherent entity. So it's service to others rather than service to self. And this entity already knows all of the possible pathways that you could choose to develop spiritually. And the thing that blew my mind was this last topic, that this entity is you. So in other words, your higher self is you from the future. I'll let this sink in for a little bit, but it was just unbelievable when I started reading the material, and and all of these things was sinking in. So basically, what happened was we're talking about a real time loop. So the time loop that we saw in the stories of Adam Warlock, they were all fictional. They were not really too far off the mark, as it's usually the case that art is inspired. So what people call craziness, or what people call just crazy artistic inspiration, that information is actually coming from somewhere. So that information is being inspired from somewhere. The artist may not know where it's taking that data from, but the data is coming from a higher place, and it may be distorted by the artist's conceptions, but there is at least a kernel of truth in that. So basically, what the law of one is saying is that you will evolve spiritually. So we are third density, we are going to ascend to fourth density, and then we're going to move on to fifth density, and then we're going to move on, eventually we're going to move on to sixth density, and we are going to be a sixth density representation of us. Now, and when we get there, we will be so powerful, our consciousness is going to be so powerful that we'll be able to break out of time and go back to help a younger version of us. Now, this is really cool, and this is really interesting, because when you go back and you try and you start inspiring a younger version of you to do the right thing, you will be perceived as an oversoul. So you will be the oversoul, you will be the higher self of yourself. And all of these stories when you start studying about spirituality and theosophy and spiritism and shamanism and all of this stuff, they talk a lot about spiritual guides. Now, the spiritual guides, what you will realize is that the spiritual guides, when they are ascended spiritual guides, when they are positive and informed and well-intentioned spiritual guides, they will always tell you, listen to your inner voice. Listen to your inner voice. And this is really interesting because you realize that the function of the spiritual guides, the spiritual teachers that you have, they're around you, for those people that can see astral entities, for those people that can hear astral entities. The function of the spiritual guides they sent to you is not to make you listen to what they say. Their function is to make you listen to your higher self. They're always trying to prod you in a way. Listen to your inner voice. Listen to yourself. Listen to your inner voice. Just meditate and spend some time in prayer. Spend some time in contemplation. Spend some time in nature. Listen to your intuition. Listen to what your higher self is telling you. And they are always, and this is what they mean. Listen to your oversoul. Listen to your higher self. Now, I'm going to leave you here. This is the first part of the video. This video is starting to get a little bit lengthy, so I will leave you with a recommendation to go and check this out. Check the raw material out. I advise you to start with videos. The book itself, it's a little bit difficult to read because it's coming. It's a channeled material. But if you want to tackle the book first, by all means, just go ahead and do it. But there are many videos of commentary and all sorts of comparisons and other material on the Ra. the raw material. And this, as I said, this is just the first part of this series of videos. This is to be continued. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about where does the Mandela Effect fit into all these time loops, the law of one, and the Warlock. I leave you with the love of God. Know that you're loved and you know that you are special. So stay safe. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, share, and see you next time.